What's happening is that detailed maps of the slave trade are now becoming a matter of immense interest because they indicate the kinds of things that must have been going on in Africa prior to the departure of slave ships for the New World. These can be laid on top of one another and on top of the Google Earth base and analyzed in reference to those geologic realities underneath them. The result is you can look at new features of Africa, or I should say, age-old features of Africa in a new way, like river basins and deserts, mountains and forests, all of which are rapidly changing in our climate circumstance. If you map some of the historical material on top of these geologic views from space, satellite views, you can learn a great deal, especially if you look at them in detail. That's now become possible. It's become possible because of the digitization revolution. These maps can be digitized and shaped in different ways to fit on geologic substrates, but also they can be blown up and expanded to read details barely legible in smaller sizes, and certainly not available to the general public because these are rare and fragile maps, which few people used to get access to. Now, however, with digitization undertaken in part to conserve these maps, these digitized images can be shared and examined by groups of people never previously having access to them. Take a look, for example, at what is being undertaken in the Africa Map Circle, a group of people internationally that have gotten together to share this kind of information and share their analyses of these maps. They're inspired in part by the work of Prosser Gifford, a professor of African history for a long time. He died recently in 2020, but he taught that our understanding of African history, in fact, all history, is shaped by two principal factors. First, the nature of the data we have available to interpret and discuss, and second, the range of people and perspectives who are included in the circle to discuss it, discuss the maps, discuss the documents, and the like. That's crucial. First, the nature of the data. Second, the range of people and perspectives who are included in the circle, as he called it, in the circle to discuss it. That's a key concept. Who's in the circle? Well, the Africa Map Circle is trying to expand the circle beyond those who had access to rare book libraries or map collections of a specialized type to a much broader range of historians, scholars, students, and the general public. The Africa Map Circle seeks to be inclusive, whereas previous collections were by intention exclusive in the sense that you needed to preserve these maps, and that meant that they were kept from the public largely and only displayed in certain occasions and under very controlled conditions. But what is the circle? Well, let's take a look at it. The Africa Map Circle is a very interesting new intellectual enterprise because you could argue that the African continent was arguably the first one in the world to be mapped in its full outline. It was circumnavigated long before the Americas, or for Australia, for example, or certainly for Asia and large parts of the Russian north, the Siberian plains. But Africa maps were made largely and created by non-Africans. Now, this is an interesting anomaly. The first continent, you could call it that, to be fully encircled and mapped, but mapped by those who weren't from the continent by and large. Therefore, Africa maps can only be understood as multicultural documents from the beginning. What are the early maps? Well, in many cases, they're transcriptions of places and names for places that were used in the local language. In other cases, they're names applied from European traditions. But which European tradition? Well, it depends upon the European group making the map. So there's a hodgepodge of different names, sometimes referring to places, sometimes referring to kingdoms, sometimes referring to names of peoples or associations of peoples or federations of tribes. Other times referring to rather mundane things like salt pans and hard rock. These maps are multicultural to begin with, and they require international and multicultural teams of students and scholars to be analyzed adequately. They can't be understood from only one linguistic tradition, for example, nor can they be fully understood if we don't understand what a place name means in the local language. Digital technology now makes it possible to share and analyze these maps around the globe. This is what's new. The maps are old, but the technology is allowing us to do new things with them. The result is that the collaborative study of African maps can now provide a new paradigm for international and multicultural teaching and learning. This is very important because the techniques devised here are not just exclusive to Africa. They can be applied to any part of the globe with any linguistic tradition. The study of Chinese maps, for example, could be undertaken in the same way that we're studying now maps in the Africa Map Circle. Study of Arabic maps of Africa, could be included in the same kind of scope, and with great results. Let's see what its intentions are. You might well ask, well, what is it? And you could scan the QR code and find out for yourself. How can it help me? How can it help those I know learn more or teach about Africa? Well, check it out. Scan the code and begin to participate, learn more, and join in. The goals of the Africa Map Circle are pretty simple and can be outlined very quickly. First, to provide readily available public access for scholars and students to historical and contemporary maps of Africa. Second, to provide for educators and students at all levels of teaching and learning resources to use in their own research and their development of online curricula, with selected examples provided from the Africa Map Circle's own Explorations series. And 3, to inspire and encourage scholars and students to expand and extend and share these tools in developing their own online African history research and teaching in Africa, the Americas, in Europe, Asia, and in fact, throughout the world. This is the kind of thing that could facilitate the Chinese study of Africa, the study of Arab countries along the northern part of Africa, and their understanding in their own cartographic tradition of sub-Saharan Africa, their understanding of the Indian Ocean and the role that African traders played in the Indian Ocean. All of these new extensible research areas can be absorbed in what the Africa Map Circle is beginning to undertake. In the future, the Africa Map Circle will seek to provide a platform upon which to share scholarly research and novel instruction initiatives that demonstrate a creative use of maps in online teaching and learning about Africa throughout the world. So, join up, join in. The Africa Map Circle is something for the public in general to learn from and learn about. Under lockdown, which we've all experienced for the last year and a half or so, this has become particularly important because learning under lockdown has changed from the very basic levels of elementary school right up through colleges, universities, and graduate school. Everyone's had to shelter in place and hunker down in a kind of new isolationism. Africa is a huge place, but we didn't learn much about it by going there during the last 18 months. Couldn't go there. Similarly, Africans couldn't come out from the continent and tell us, as they normally have, as exchange students throughout the Western world. That lockdown has meant there's been a kind of cutoff of the usual educational process. But we've devised new tools and developed some tips for online learning about Africa and the world during this lockdown. You can get in touch with some of these through the Africa Map Circle. At the African Studies Association last year, there was a special panel devoted to this. It's called Online Research and Teaching with Africa Maps, Tips, Techniques, Examples, and Resources. And it was put together by the Africa Map Circle, coordinated by them as one of the special sessions. It was highly successful, an international meeting, and in some sense it served as a proof of concept of what could lie in store for an even more ambitious effort. What can it do for students and scholars? Well, take a look at the online research and teaching that we managed to undertake during these lockdown times. Online Research and Teaching with African Maps was a paper presented at the ASA meeting, and you can get access to it by clicking on the resources, scanning in the code, and clicking on the paper citation. So what we're looking at is bringing into a conversation with one another, not just old maps and digital technology, but new communities, plus new narratives in African and global history. How are we doing it? Well, largely through digital communications technology, not just the digitization of individual maps and the ability to send these by email or something like that, but the ability to explore them together with virtual seminar. This is what the African Studies meeting proved last year. We could hold a virtual international seminar with people from all over the world to take part in a Zoom session where things were shared online, real time with one another.